Throughout history, freethinkers have outraged the religious with their wacky ideas about the virtues of free speech, reason, and of course, eating babies. Now, God is dying, and it's time to dispose of his remains. From the pits of hell, Satan sends two puppets of the imperialist West and the Zionist Jews against God, Islam, and tiny kittens to bring you their propaganda and conspire for a new world order. This is Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment with Ali Rizvi and Armin Navabi.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Secular Jihadists for a Muslim Enlightenment. My name is Ali Rizvi and with me is Armin Navabi. Armin, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I am good, thank you. How are you? He's good.
I already answered.
Okay. So today is actually a really interesting topic that we've been kind of probably wanting to talk about for a while, and now we're actually going to get into it, and I think we have the right guest for it today. Omar Baddar, we connected a little while ago, I think many months ago, and we've been trying to sort of get his appearance on this podcast, but because of scheduling issues and everything, weren't able to do it. He's finally here. Omar is an agnostic and a secularist of Muslim background. He is the deputy director of the Arab American Institute, and he's a political analyst who specializes in the Israel-Palestine conflict. He is a social and political commentator. His commentary has appeared on BBC, MSNBC, Al Jazeera, The Daily Beast, Huffpost, and several other outlets. And today we're going to talk about, I think, when you reached out to me, something that you wanted to talk about, which was the intellectual dark web. So we're going to get into what the intellectual dark web is, and specifically whether the intellectual dark web is promoting or endorsing or has an unhealthy tolerance for anti-Muslim bigotry. So that's something we're going to get into. Omar, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so to start with, let's just first get into what our understanding is of the term the intellectual dark web. Armin, do you want to give a bit of a history of it, or
no,
am I putting you on the spot?
You're the storyteller.
Okay, all right. So the intellectual dark web.
Keep it short though, because most of our audience knows. So keep it short. Yeah. Okay.
So the intellectual dark web. I can't remember whether it was Eric Weinstein who coined it or Sam Harris, but it was basically a term that was an umbrella term for a group of commentators, and mainly sort of like online commentators and authors, that was a pretty disparate group, disparate with a D-I-S, as in there was a lot of, they come from very different backgrounds. Some of them are sort of left liberals, others are more right-wing, they're conservative. Some of them are, well, I mean, it includes people like Sam Harris, who's a neuroscientist, and a philosopher, and he tends to lean liberal. Then it also has Eric Weinstein and Brett Weinstein. Brett Weinstein was the professor, the evolutionary biologist, at what was the college? Was he at
Evergreen?
Evergreen, yes, he was at Evergreen. And there, it also includes Dave Rubin, Ben Shapiro, Majid Nawaz, Christina Hoff Sommers, and sort of several other people that I can't recall. I think Joe Rogan was also part of it. And it was sort of officialized in an article in the New York Times last year by Bari Weiss. And she just talked about how there's this intellectual dark web. There are these people who are talking about these ideas that are generally not in the mainstream. There's sort of alternative commentaries that are counter to the mainstream narrative, and they're trying to challenge ideas that other people won't talk about, and it's essentially an umbrella term. And there were a lot of accusations. There are people who really like it, and there are people who really don't like it. The whole idea. There are other people who like some people in it, and they don't like other people, which I think is probably the most reasonable position, because it's a very strange umbrella to put over. It's certainly not a homogeneous group. So what is your understanding, Omar, of the intellectual dark web? And did I define it okay, or is there something you'd want to add?
No, I think it's pretty close. I mean, I think the sort of the romantic narrative about them, the reason why there's the word dark in there, is that this is a group of people whose intellectual ideas are sort of like this underground stream of rational thought that is not allowed a space in the mainstream, and that's why it's a dark web. And I find that to be a little bit disingenuous and over-romanticized in the sense that a lot of the people that you've listed have been on MSNBC or CNN or Fox News and have written in pretty mainstream outlets. So their ideas are getting some significant level of exposure in mainstream discourse. And I also think that there's the idea that what unites them is a huge commitment to free speech and thinking out of the box. And I think that that has a lot of truth in it, right? I think that when I think of the sort of in general, what that group, loose collection of thinkers brings to the table, there is the idea that you should not think strictly in terms of the traditional liberal conservative dichotomy and left-right divide, that there is something bigger than that we can engage in constructive dialogue about a lot of things. But really, to me, what actually unites them is their collective hostility towards political correctness and identity politics on the left. I mean, just that seems to be the common thread that puts them all into one collective web.
But do you think that they're justified in that? Do you think there is a problem on the left with identity politics and political correctness?
So I do think that there is a problem in the sense that there are excesses that one can point to, but I think they blow them out of proportion. And there is this reflexive hostility towards political correctness and identity politics, and I don't think that it's necessarily consistent.
I think it is a big issue, the identity politics on the left. I just adjust that by, I don't think people are blowing it out of proportion. I think it's a huge deal. The only thing I adjust is that it's not a left thing. Identity politics is being played by both left wing, both by the far left and the far right. That's the only that's the only adjustment I make to it. I do think it's a big deal on both sides. So it's not like I know people like David Pacman say like, oh, it's not a big deal at all. Like, no, the left, only a very few fringe minority on the left are playing identity politics. Yeah, it is a fringe minority, but it's a very influential fringe minority. And now he himself is experiencing his own audience attacking him. Like, I mean, do you know ContraPoints?
I don't follow ContraPoints.
ContraPoints is like this. So David Pacman and ContraPoints are such a good example because they're both left wing, and David Pacman was somebody that says that this whole identity politics is being out of proportion. But now his audience are going after him for exactly the same reasons, for purity culture and all that stuff. And ContraPoints is this transgender rights activist, and she has done so much to bring attention to like transgender rights and stuff. And she just said one tweet that just her audience didn't like, and now she's like quit Twitter. Like they went her.
Well, what did she say? I don't know anything about
this. She said I think if I remember correctly, and you guys could correct me if I'm wrong in the live chat or stuff. She said that it started when she goes to very hyper woke environments, and this obsession over people constantly have to, worry about their pronouns and stuff like that. She finds that annoying, right? I think, maybe I'm misrepresenting her, but this is what I think she said, so please correct me if I'm wrong. But then whatever she said, it doesn't really matter, because the thing is that one statement made her, and so many people go after her. And she's been like somebody with such a record that has done more than most of these people to bring attention and fight for raising awareness about a transgender issue and educating people about transgender issue. They're going after her, like shooting your own people that are fighting on your side. Going like this shows to me that there is a problem. There is a huge problem. Yes, it is a fringe minority on the left, just like the alt-right is a fringe minority of the right. But both of them are really big problems. I'm not saying which one is it.
Let me challenge two things. Let me challenge two things on this front. First, I don't deny that it's a pretty significant phenomena in the sense that it's happened to me. It's happened to almost everybody that I know. If you step slightly out of line, you're going to get trashed on Twitter by people who try to police your discourse. But I want to ask what's the actual physical harm apart from being trolled on Twitter? If you just mute your notifications, then it's a pretty much powerless dynamic. This outrage culture, this manufactured outrage culture that exists.
Well, let me tell you, because it's not just about trolling on Twitter, right? So first of all, obviously none of the, if we're talking about physical harm, almost most of the discussions that people are having against us, they're not physically harming us. And when we're calling them out as wrong, people are like, well, they're wrong. Why are you calling them out? So, we'll go after wrong statements, whether they're harming us physically or not, right? But when it comes to these people's attitudes, it's way more than just trolling and Twitter people like going after you on Twitter, because the ideology of the far leftist people has a huge impact on social media, on the community standards, on Twitter. So here's the thing. The alt-right and alt-left, far right and far left, they both have dangerous ideas. The reason why I could tell you the ideas of far right is way more dangerous than the ideas of far left. But at the moment that we're speaking today, the ideas of the far left has more impact on a global scale than the ideas of far right, because they have their philosophy and their ideology has an impact on how Twitter monitors, its community standards, and Facebook, YouTube, and all these other, and these are in platforms where discussions are happening on a global scale. And I can tell you, just to adjust myself, if the far right was in charge of these, had an influence on these platforms, it might have been even worse. But right now they don't. But go ahead.
You're talking about sort of like Twitter policy on which tweets get taken down. Compare that to the rise of the right, with the rise of Donald Trump, with anti-immigrant sentiment, with white supremacist violence that is claiming dozens and dozens of lives across the country. I mean, I think that there's no comparison there.
Yeah,
no. Actually, let me respond to that, because I agree with you. If you look at, you said across the country, right? So if you focus on certain countries, right, obviously one of them is going to be more than the other. And again, this is not a competition. I'm not denying the rise of the far right, right? Especially in India, actually. But I also agree with it that it's rising in North America and in Europe, not as much as in other places like India, but still it's rising. But I'm talking about globally. Okay, so when it comes, if you focus on the U.S., the attack of like Trump's administration on freedom of expression is way beyond what like going after reporters, college campuses. Now with this anti-BDS, I mean, I'm against. That's a different discussion, and I think we disagree with that. I'm against BDS, but I am against silencing people that are pro-BDS, right? So I think that's an anti-free speech move by this administration. I think trying to take the licenses away from news reporters is a free speech issue, way above anything that I see. Like social media policies is less of a concern to me than when the government steps in and tries to limit free speech. So that's the bigger concern. But so if you focus on the U.S., maybe you're right. But if you focus globally, I'm telling you that the conversations that are being had, like more people are having conversations right now on these on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter than anywhere else combined, right? So anything that influence, like all of these community standards is being decided in Silicon Valley, and anything that slightly changes what's allowed and what's not is just changing global discussions on a mass astronomical way.
So Omar, and just to add on that, I think just to clarify a little bit, we've been dealing a lot with protesters in Iran tweeting, or people uploading videos to YouTube. So, for instance, a lot of secularists are doing that. A lot of the protests in Iran are being done by secularists, and because of the things that they're saying, because of their policy rules on criticizing religion, for instance, a lot of them get dinged, right? So I think that's one of the examples of what Armin's going on. But go ahead, like Armin.
Sorry, I'm going to stop talking.
So I mean, there's so much actually. It's kind of hard to decide where to begin. But
go for it.
For example, Zuhdi Jasser recently called me a terrorist on Twitter. Specified that he thinks that I'm running terrorist operations. He knows that's a lie. That's not. It's not an issue of having sort of a mistaken understanding. And I reported it to Twitter, and Twitter responded by saying, "Oh, we've seen no violation." So, I don't want to hype the extent to which.
1 second.
Yeah.
So no, go ahead, Dara. Go ahead, Omar.
Sorry.
So, there's plenty of stuff that obviously crosses the line, and this is not just somebody expressing an opinion. Accusing somebody of carrying out terrorist operations is really libel, and frankly, it puts my life at risk. Something that you guys are familiar with, I'm sure, with the kind of accusations and stuff that comes your way. As far as sort of Trumpism is concerned, I'm trying to remember where I was going to go with that one. you're talking about sort of we agreed. So put the substance of BDS aside and just talk about it from a free speech angle. We agree, and it's, by the way, not just this administration. It's also been the Republican-controlled Congress that has been trying to push bills back when Congress was in control, and now with the Senate also remaining in Republican hands, they attempted to push legislation that seeks to punish American citizens who choose to boycott Israel.
Yeah.
And that, to me, is the frustration, is that you have the intellectual dark web that is supposed to be about free speech, and there's barely a peep, If pressed on it, some of them might push a tweet forward saying, oh yeah, this is not great. But this is not what they're talking about when it comes to free speech. They're focusing on sort of what college campus students are engaged in terms of like shouting down speakers or whatever, but a much more significant threat that is coming from the government to suppress Americans' right to free expression, that ends up going ignored. Well, there's a lot of complaints about identity politics, right? But to me, when somebody and sort of like the left overusing the charge of racism, they're mad at the left because they think the left throws the word racist at anyone at any moment. But then you look at somebody like Mark Lamont Hill, who gives a speech about Israel that Ben Shapiro doesn't like, and Ben Shapiro calls him an anti-Semite. And that's precisely the kind of thing that they're supposed, they complain about on the left, and then they reflect all these behaviors themselves, many of them, and there's just no self-awareness about it.
To be fair, though, it really depends on which one of these people are talking about on the intellectual dark web, because Sam Harris goes after Trump way more than he goes after, like, at least, after the leftists. Like, he calls out Trump on all his nonsense all the time. So
he despises. Yeah. But I want to say this. So Omar, I actually agree with you. I think this is one of the things that even Armin and I over here have talked about as well, is that this accusation of, how they say the left says, you're a racist, you're a bigot. I mean, we both get called that all the time. I'm pretty sure you have to at some point. We've been called Nazis and what have we been called?
That Nazi. But by the way, just now you mentioned Nazi is just like. So all my efforts not swearing is now it doesn't matter anymore because we mentioned Nazis. So guys, the people that are listening to this, please share these videos, because when we say Nazis, this video will not get recommended to anybody. So please share our videos. Go on. All right.
So in any case, so there's that aspect, but you're absolutely right. And again, we've talked about this at anytime this charge of anti-Semitism. And we did a whole show on this with Jay Shapiro, not Ben Shapiro. He would not appreciate that comparison. But with Jay Shapiro, when he was on, he talked about it. We talked about the political cartoon in the New York Times about whether it was anti-Semitic or not, and he didn't think that it was. He thought it was legitimate satire and so on. So we think that this the right throws that around, like, oh, you're an anti-Semite, you're a terrorist, you're this and that, all the time. And this is something that Armin mentioned that I think is a good point, is when you talk about identity politics on the left, it is just as much on the right, if not more, because on the right people always talk about our European heritage and the whites are going to be replaced and our Christian, so Judeo-Christian values. It's all the nation states. It's the nationalism itself. Nationalism is the most it's the epitome of identity politics, right? So there's all of these things. They exist. I do think, and this is where I think we disagree. So we're not. I mean, when it comes to when you talk about Dave Rubin, and I'll tell you personally, I knew Dave Rubin. I was one of the first, and when he started his show, I was one of the first few guests that was on it. He actually did a lot of good stuff back then, bringing the voices of ex-Muslims and the ex-Muslim movement out. Many of us went on a show, and later on, when he changed, and I'm not. It's just I don't talk to him anymore. Like we're not in touch anymore
because we were too critical of them.
We were critical of him once, right, or twice, and he wasn't able to deal with it. So
all these accusations of snowflake, the left-wing snowflake. Again, that's not out of proportion. The far left is a bunch of snowflakes, but so is the far right. I mean, not the sorry, Dave Rubin is not far right, but so are people that are associate. A lot of people that associate themselves with the right.
Yeah. Right. But I think what I'm getting to is, aside from that, I think there are different people here. I think that someone like, for example, someone like Sam Harris, right? And Sam Harris is somebody that I think we're going to disagree on because I actually have a lot of respect for him. I disagree with a lot of things that he says. I do. Okay, and we can get into that if you want. But I think that he's been very consistent in terms of he comes from a good faith place. If he thinks that something should be criticized, he will. He does call out identity politics on the far right as well.
Yep.
He frequently speaks about. In fact,
okay,
his
Ali,
own listener.
let's start. Both me and you are talking way too much, and I'm not letting our guests.
That's right. I keep on forgetting that I'm talking too much too.
Not at all. No. I think
yeah.
honestly, this is a good point for an interjection here. I'll grant you two things about Sam Harris. I think he is incredibly intelligent. There's no question about it. And I think anybody who listens to him talk can see that he's a very high IQ person who's very, very interesting on a wide range of topics. So I actually enjoy listening to him in general. And I think he does come from an honest place about this. He's not a Brigitte Gabriel or some of these characters that are obviously just lying through their teeth and engaging in all kinds of propaganda for the sake of generating a certain climate. Nonetheless, having said that, I think that he is very defensive and does not like to examine his own biases and can be a little bit tribal in the sense that I'll give you one example that happened early on when there was an attempt to build a Muslim community center in New York that was going to be 3 blocks away from where the World Trade Center once stood. Sam Harris was one of the most outspoken people against it and was basically, we're talking about here, by the way, about the fundamental right of American citizens to exercise their religious freedom to build a Muslim community center. And based on the proximity of that center to Ground Zero, it ended up being dubbed the Ground Zero Mosque. And Sam Harris was one of the people who crusaded against it. So that, to me, first of all, is incredibly biased. And second of all, it is identity politics, right? So when we complain about Muslims, for example, engaging in identity politics, I think identity politics comes a lot from the fact that people are under attack because of their identity. And if you have American Muslims being told that because of who they are, they can't build a community center or a place of worship within a certain vicinity of something else, then that's why people organize around that identity. And I think this is one of the examples where Sam Harris was just completely wrong, and I can list multiple examples like that.
Well, I mean, I haven't researched that example, but the examples that I have looked into seems like he was completely mischaracterized and such an obvious way. Like the 3 that I had in mind was when he said the profiling of people in airports, whether nuclear first strike on a Muslim country. And the most recent one with Al Jazeera's clip, I saw that was such a dishonest way of quote mining him. So Sam Harris came, they took one of his, I don't know, he was on a news clip or something, and he was saying that we are not, his point was that we are not at war with all Muslims, right? Mm-hmm. We are only at war with a certain group of Muslims. So if you just played, the Al Jazeera clipped out something that he said that made it look like he's saying we're at war with all Muslims. But if you just played just a few more seconds, you could see that he was saying the exact opposite, that we are not at war with all Muslims, that we are only at war with a certain group of Muslims that are willing to go blow themselves up. And he, even in that quote, he specifically said they are a minority of Muslims, right? So think about how dishonest, and as a news source as big as Al Jazeera, this could not have been a mistake. This must have been on purpose to take a sentence like that. Nobody could edit this unless it was on purpose. To take a quote that he's specifically saying that we're not we're all Muslims and clip it out that actually says the exact opposite and put it on Al Jazeera to millions of viewers makes me think if Al Jazeera can do that and get away with it, how many other people are doing that? I mean, we have experienced that. Ali and I experienced that with our own things, right? Mm-hmm. Ali, for example, I have said many things that I even said online, people are some people might actually take this part out and not give my full point to make me look like racist. And even after I said, how disingenuous it would be if somebody did that, they still did that. They still went and did that to me. So this is why I'm always very skeptical if somebody says, Sam Harris is racist, so-and-so is racist. I don't know. You have to really see what they were saying. Like with the profiling part, right? The profiling part, like the part that people leave out is when he said people should be profiled. By the way, I disagree with Sam Harris's profiling policies, but it was not a racist claim, even though I disagree with his position for different reasons. What he was saying is that he would be one of those people. Like that has to be like based on his profile, being male, being like certain age, he would be picked as one of the people that would be profiled for extra security screening instead of like his grandma or something like that, right? Or a 4-year-old girl, right? So
this is one of the things that I actually ended up writing an in-depth piece on, the profiling angle. I'm not familiar with the Al Jazeera clip, so I can't really comment about it individually.
Right.
But I definitely.
I also have I'll let you go on. I also have a comment. I looked up his position on the 9/11 mosque, and we'll get into that in a bit too. But
sure,
go ahead.
He, on the profiling. Sorry, before that, I'm trying to remember what I was saying. Directly before that,
you said you wrote an in-depth piece on the.
On the profiling bit. On generally speaking, Sam Harris being misrepresented. I think. I have definitely seen people misquote him and misattribute things to him online, so I'm familiar with it, that the fact that this happens. But just because that kind of thing happened does not mean that he has not said offensive things that were offensive in context. And I think that there's plenty of
I wasn't claiming that. I was claiming that's why I would be skeptical, not that I would. Yeah. So if you say I've seen these things, so I would never believe, that's too far. Just because some people are lying, that doesn't mean you should not believe any claims. But that does give you reason to be extremely skeptical.
Certainly, it becomes important to, whenever you hear a claim, to actually do a little bit of research and double check the context and read it for yourself. And I think that one of the cases, there was a lot of talk around whether Sam Harris was being misrepresented as anti-Muslim. And Glenn Greenwald ended up writing a long piece for The Guardian called Sam Harris something. It has the words anti-Muslim animus in it. And that was a thorough sort of debunking of the claim that he's always misrepresented and taken out of context, that he provided certain context for certain things that cumulatively gave an impression of somebody who has an anti-Muslim bias.
Let's do the profiling, for example.
So, okay, let's focus on the profiling for specifically. Early on, Sam Harris said that that profiling, we should be honest about the fact that we should profile Muslims or anybody who looks like they might be Muslim.
It might conceivably look Muslim, is the words you used,
Yeah. And then in an earlier piece in the Huffington Post that he published, he made a reference to ethnic profiling. And then later on, in a clarifying interview about when he was accused of being racist because he supports profiling and so on, he appeared on Dave Rubin's show and basically said, look, all I'm arguing for is a policy of anti-profiling. I'm basically saying that a 90-year-old white woman should not be profiled because obviously she's not going to be one of the terrorists. And the problem for me is that these are contradictory positions. He has basically said multiple different things about profiling. A policy of anti-profiling is one thing. I think most common sense people would get behind that kind of thing. But when you're specifying that you want people who could plausibly be of a particular reason to be profiled, that is absolutely, undeniably an issue. Becomes to sort of then claim that Sam Harris does not support the profiling of Muslims at airports. It's just based on one.
I didn't say he doesn't support profiling. Here's the thing. I actually had to think about this to see why I would be against profiling Muslims, right? Because I am now against it. But the thing is that I had to think about it. If I see statistically, right? Statistically, it's way more likely for Muslims to be terrorists. Then why shouldn't, and we have limited resources, why shouldn't we look at Muslims more than other people, right? Why should we waste resources on people that are astronomically less likely to be terrorists on a plane? Or even people that we don't know if they're Muslim or not, that they have a background that could make them more likely to be terrorists, right? And the answer I had to that is because the social consequences to that beyond the airport is way more than any harm that you would be avoiding on a plane. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I'll give you. Yeah.
But
I'll give you three other reasons.
But the thing is that I had to think about that. I mean, I disagree with Sam Harris on this point, but we should be able to exercise these. We should be able to think about these. Like, if somebody has this position, they should be able to, I want them. Doesn't mean they're racist. They're just doing a mathematical analysis. And even though, and they're like, okay, mathematically, given limited resources, this makes sense. And this is why I think it makes sense. I don't think they're being a bigot if they're doing a statistical analysis. I am against that position. I just don't think that even though I'm against that position, I don't think it's necessarily a bigot. It could be motivated from bigoted, from a bigoted point of view.
But it doesn't have to be.
But it doesn't have to be.
So Omar, go ahead. And I have something to say. I kind of disagree with both of you guys a little bit.
All right, go on.
Omar, go ahead.
I'll say a couple of things about profiling real quick. First of all, I think it is impractical to try to profile Muslims because there is no Muslim profile. Muslims come from every part of the world. The majority of Muslims in the United States are black Muslims. So in effect, to try to profile Muslims would be to profile black people. Those would be the people who are most likely to be Muslim in an American context. So from a practical application, you can't really do it. But even if you were to try, the problem with that in principle, even if you could identify people as Muslim based on name or whatever, you end up missing all the other violent extremists. There was an attack recently in recent years against TSA by a right-wing extremist. There was a guy who flew a small plane into the IRS building. So the idea that we're looking for one kind of terrorist as opposed to looking for all plausible violence, I think to be problematic in the first place. That's
okay. So
hold on, Armin, let him get to the third one.
Sorry,
third point.
This is difficult. This is hard.
Yeah.
Good.
Strong.
By the way, I got to respond first. So go ahead.
Okay.
And the third thing I want to say about that is that oh man, I'm losing my train of thought a lot.
Yeah, I have a piece of. Have a note. This is what I'm doing. I'm just saying. Okay.
I think I should grab a pen and a piece of paper. Actually, that would be a brilliant thing.
Yeah.
I don't want to ruin the podcast. If I
don't.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Work?
No, go grab a piece
Let me
of
see. I think that'll be very, very useful. Sorry, hang on, because I've
Yeah.
lost my train of thought a couple of times already. One second.
Yeah, I'll just I'll clear up the.
Or you could open a tab with I have a Google Doc that I just write my notes whenever. But go on. Go get one.
Yeah. Go for
1 second.
Yeah, go a second. So here's the thing, Ali. But while he says, I think we need to evaluate these people. I feel like we're going to focus all our time on Sam Harris, but given that we said the intellectual dark web, I think we already touched on Dave Rubin, but I think we need to talk about Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson a little bit more too. And I really want to bring up this tweet by Ben Shapiro where he said, Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. This is not a difficult issue. So I think we should bring that tweet up at some point.
Yeah, we will. We're going to talk about that. But
anyway,
I'm
a happy camper now. I have a pen and paper.
Can I go ahead or do you?
No, he wasn't finished.
There
you go.
Yep, I'll squeeze the last thing about profiling. The point is not about Sam Harris, and I think there's just a broader point about Sam Harris is that I think a lot of the times he's accused of being misrepresented and quote mined because he does take contradictory positions and he's not always very clear about the position that he's actually taking, which is something that I find frustrating, is that if you take multiple positions on a particular issue, the way he did with profiling, then I can see how somebody who's familiar with one specific interview of him would be aggrieved because they feel that Sam Harris is being misrepresented if he's accused of saying XYZ when he has used the term
How is it multiple position though? It's just different examples.
It kind of is, Armin.
It's just different examples of the same position.
Yeah, one of them is ethnic profiling, right? Just the most extreme contrast is that the very first piece he wrote in the Huffington Post, he made an explicit reference to ethnic profiling. He used the word ethnic. Right. And then in the last position that he took, which I think it was much more developed in the Dave Rubin interview, he only said, I'm for anti-profiling. We should not profile people who are obviously extremely unlikely to become a threat. And I think that those are very different things.
So here's what I think. I think that there was a genuine evolution in his views. I think that when I remember reading that first HuffPost piece, and I had the same reaction you did, I think that the idea of ethnic profiling, the first thing that I thought was, okay, so now, first of all, rewind and let's go back to this context. Today, when there is a terrorist attack and someone drives a car into a crowd, and this is weird, compared to 4 years ago where we're like, okay, this is almost certainly an Islamic terrorist attack. Now I think I'm like, okay, this is probably most likely a white supremacist or an incel or something, right? But it could be an Islamic terrorist attack as well. So it's in the West. We're talking about specifically in the West, in Europe and in the United States. So those things have changed. So in terms of profiling, a lot of, when we talk about terrorism, that whole paradigm has shifted. When you wrote those articles, the paradigm was very different.
But before you continue, can I also write a note what you're going to say?
I have a question for you, though. So
go ahead.
I'm happy to ask it to you, and then you can give me the answer and whatever you're saying.
Okay, go. No, go. Ask a question. Guess.
Okay. My question for you, Armin, is if somebody says, according to statistics, black people are more likely to commit robberies, according to federal statistics.
Okay.
Therefore, we should profile black people when they're entering malls. Would you find that to be a bigoted position?
Depends on the motivation of the person, and I'm not minded. I would be against that position, right? I would be against that position because I think that even if that even with true statistics, even with true data, the backlash and the social living in a society where your ethnicity makes you determines how you're treated, the consequences of that is way more than the harms that you're causing, right? So I would be against that position, but I'm not going to accuse the person that is saying that, right? I'm not going to think that I don't know if they're a bigot or not, right? If they are saying, listen, if they are in their own honest mind to themselves, right? They could be like, you know what? I just hate black people, and I just want them to be profiled, right? And I just think they're inferior, and I think they should be treated differently. That person is a bigot. If somebody is like, you know what? Or they're in their own mind, in their honest mind, they be like, I really wish this wasn't the case. I really wish that this is going to be really bad. I don't want this to be the solution. But given the data that I've seen, given what I looked at the data, it seems like this is the only solution. Even if I think they're wrong, but even if they're wrong, their intention was not bigoted. So I think two different people could have the same wrong answer. One of them with bigoted intentions, but one of them with non-bigoted and intentions that just came to an unfortunate conclusion, right?
Does
that make sense?
Yeah, I understand. Yeah,
but Omar, I want to answer that too. So I actually think that is a bigoted position. I don't think I think Armin's right that whoever came up with it, they may not have intended it to be bigoted. That's a different thing. We can't read people's minds all the time. But I do think it's a bigoted position. But I think it's a wrong example too. So now
why is it a bigoted position if your intentions were not bigoted? What makes it bigoted?
Hold on, Armin. Let me explain. So the thing I think that the more apt comparison here is that if the KKK is going out on a terrorist attack spree, and we're like, okay, we are going to profile basically white people, right? Because the KKK is almost all white. I think that's reasonable. If you have the black Hebrew, what is that group? The Hebrew Israelites.
Yep.
Yeah, the people who just did that recent attack on the anti-Semitic attack. Okay, so those guys, the shooting in, I think it was Jersey City, right?
Yeah.
So those guys, if they say that, these guys, the Hebrew Israelites which is a black group, they're going around and they are on this terrorist spree, and we're trying to look for them. Then yes, in that case, you'd be profiling specifically black people.
But it's not speculative. It is happening right now, right? We have a spree of white supremacist
mass
shootings.
I have a question. Can I ask my question?
Hold on. Just let me finish this. You guys talk.
But just to me, that's the equivalence, right? If there's a spree of white supremacist mass shootings, we don't profile white people.
Shouldn't we? No, that's my question. Shouldn't we?
We should. We should, Omar.
Omar, shouldn't we though?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm trying to say.
No, but that's my question. I want to know what his answer is. Let's say that we show data shows that right now white supremacists in the United States are committing most of the terrorist attacks. Should police, when police force, when they're going out and looking for suspects, like right-wing white supremacists that are trying to, that are planning an attack, right? Should they stop?
Should they? Group.
Yeah. Should they, if that is what FBI is investigating? Do you think they should stop black people as well, or should shouldn't they just only look for white people?
You're putting your finger on it, right? If we're talking about a specific incident that was carried out by a white supremacist, of course they should only be looking for white people. That's called basic police work. However, as a general policy, should police be concerned about white supremacist violence to the exclusion of other forms of violence? I mean,
no. Let's say you have a branch in FBI, okay, that is focused on stopping white supremacists, right? It's not about a specific day, By
the way, there was one, and Trump canceled it. There was a focus on white supremacist
violence. Let's say we bring it back, okay? And this is not. They're not looking at a specific crime that is going to happen tomorrow that they learn about, that they know who the suspects are. No, it's just a general task force against white supremacists, and they're investigating people. Shouldn't these people be ignoring any black people being active?
Yeah. So the only distinction we're drawing here is between individual units that are focused on an individual problem, in which case, obviously, they should focus on the profile that they're going after.
Okay, so you
opposed
agree,
to a
like,
general policy
hold on,
at airport security.
Armin, let him finish.
If you're walking through airport security,
Right.
certainly the job of airport security to look at everyone and every potential kind of different violent or extremist or armed person, not a specific profile.
So another more closer example. Let's say Islamic terrorist attacks died down completely. Okay, like it became a fraction of what it used to be, and now every terrorist attack, the vast majority of terrorist attack is by white supremacists. Plane attacks, suicide attacks, whatever, right? In that case, in the airport, right? Shouldn't the airport security just mostly stop white men? No?
I don't think so at all, because again, we're talking about, and if you ignore any particular kind of threat, you're creating a profile for who can get past that, right?
But would that be a bigoted position? Let's say, you're right. I don't think that's a good policy, even if all terrorist attacks are by white supremacists, right? The reason why I wouldn't be for airport security only stopping white men would be because of the backlash, because of the social reaction to the reaction to that in the society at large. But I don't think that the motivation of the airport, like if the airport came up with this policy, like, oh, let's just focus on white people from now on because statistically it's very unlikely for anybody else to be a terrorist. Even though I would be against that position, I wouldn't say like, oh, these airport security people are bigoted. I think their motivation was not to be bigoted. Their motivation was security.
I think that okay. So first of all, we got to wrap this up because we got to move on. Like we're getting caught up in this a little bit too much.
Sorry.
But I just wanted to finish the thing I was saying. So I wasn't talking about. I think when it comes to the ethnic side of things, the moment you go ethnic, you are you're pigeonholing, right? And I feel like that is always a bigoted position. The only time where it becomes a little rough is if you have an ethnic group that is associated with a certain thing like the Black Hebrew Israelites or the KKK or white supremacist terrorism, and then with the Islamic thing, I disagree with Sam Harris about the ethnic thing, and I think that he eventually moved away from that position himself, even though he didn't. I don't know if he overtly said it. Yeah, but the idea was that there's a religious profiling aspect where when you're looking for Islamic terrorists, then you're not going to look for the Amish. I mean, you're just not going to do that. But that doesn't mean that you're only looking at brown people. You're also looking at the Tsarnaev brothers, who are literally from the Caucasus Mountains, where the word Caucasian comes from. You've got Jose Padilla.
But examples don't mean anything. You have to look at statistics.
No, but I'm talking about all of the terrorist attacks that were done. Right. The underwear bomber was from Nigeria. I mean, this is not just examples. These are the Pacho people who did this stuff.
All right, guess. I'm going to stop talking. Let's
stop. Let's let Omar have the last word on this, and then we'll move on because I want to.
Actually, I'll draw it back. I'll just I don't know if we want to continue on the Sam Harris aspect of it, but I would like to just say one broader point about him. Right. I agree that any individual policy or position or statement, you can discern racist motivations or not racist motivations or what. There could be multiple explanations for why somebody could advocate for a particular position on any issue. However, cumulatively, you can create a picture of who a person is depending on the kind of concerns they generally have. And so for me, when you add together the fact that Sam Harris believes that Islam is more dangerous than other religions, and he's concerned about sort of Muslim immigration to Western countries, and he's concerned about the Ground Zero Mosque, the so-called Ground Zero Mosque, Muslims building a mosque. On Israel-Palestine, he ends up being much more sympathetic to Israel than the Palestinians, even though that to me is a case of, it's such a simple situation where one people are oppressed and the other side is the oppressor. And then you add on top of that he's comfortable with somebody like Ben Shapiro, who I think is a right-wing religious extremist, and Sam Harris can sit down with him and have a nice conversation, but then he views somebody like Linda Sarsour as a crazy religious zealot that he can't possibly ever have anything in common with. All of that points to a certain tribal tendency to view Muslims as the other and to make excuses for people on his own side. And I think that's the problem. And I don't think Sam Harris is being intentionally bigoted about any of this stuff. I think all of us have biases. And my frustration is that I don't think Sam Harris really examines his own biases. When he talks about the concern about Muslim immigration, he makes a reference to Muslim men raping white women. Why was it white women? Why is the word white necessary in talking about that as an example? That to me really screams tribalism.
So, but first, I don't know. There's a list of things there, but Islam is more dangerous than other religions. Well, I mean,
How so?
Well, okay, and because so here's the thing: like all of these religions are all equally false, but they're not equally dangerous. The reason why they're not equally dangerous,
They all are dangerous.
they all are dangerous, of course. Any false idea is dangerous. The reason why they're not equally dangerous is because Islam is a lot more political and obsessed with governance and obsessed with influencing people's lives and obsessed with telling followers of Islam how to control the people's lives way more than other religions. Again, I'm not saying the other ones don't do that. I'm just saying Islam Islam does it a lot more. If you compare Islam with Christianity, for example, the story of Muhammad and the story of Jesus are similar in a way that both Muhammad and Jesus, the characters, I'm not talking about whatever their true characters were, or whatever they actually did historically, the characters as is canon in Christianity and Islam, they were both rebels against religious authorities at their time. The only difference is that Jesus didn't win. He got crucified by the Romans and didn't manage to rule. Muhammad rebelled against the religious authorities of the time, and he won. And half of his story is him ruling over a group of people. So if Christianity could be simplified in do what Jesus does and says, and Islam could be simplified to do what Muhammad says and does, then Muhammad's life includes a ruling, which makes it a lot more political than Christianity could ever be. Again, I do agree that Christianity has verses in the Bible that could very much be used for political reasons, right? But not as they have been many times. But when it comes to a weapon for ruling over people, I think you can't find something better than Islam.
Yeah.
I really disagree with that assessment.
But is that a bigoted position, though? Even if you disagree,
you can theoretically argue it on merits.
Right.
Just I think you would need a lot more compelling evidence. There was a time when
but I could be wrong with that being a bigot. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure, you're not inherently bigoted for speculating based on the text or whatever that Islam is more dangerous. That does not necessarily mean that you are inherently bigoted. True.
Right. I am I'm sorry, Armin, I keep on doing this, but
no, thank you. You need to do that. I'm practicing.
Go ahead,
on.
Omar.
Yep. But I think that there was a time when Christian Europe was in the Dark Ages and the Muslims were going through the Golden Age of Enlightenment. Mm-hmm. And when you look at that setup, you could very well look in that environment and say, oh, well, Christianity clearly is much more ripe to authoritarianism and anti-science and so on.
So
I need to respond. Can I respond to that?
No, Armin, I'm going to respond.
No, you can't. I have to respond to this because
Armin,
I have to respond to this because I wasn't.
Okay,
you changed it to Christians and Muslims. I wasn't talking about Muslims and Christians. Muslims are not Muslims. Arab and Persians who happen to be Muslim went through a golden age, not because of Islam, despite of Islam. Same as Christians when they went through an Enlightenment age. It had nothing to do with Christianity. It was in spite of Christianity, right? So I'm talking about the religion itself, not what Muslims and Christians did. But go, sorry.
Major point, Armin.
Okay.
The thing is, look, here's what he's talking about is we're not talking about Muslims and Christians. We're talking about Islam and Christianity. I have another view on this. I think that, yes, historically, every religion has kind of had its time. Christianity, for a very long time, was actually the worst religion and the most dangerous religion out there. A lot of it was because of the Old Testament. So here's what the reason that I think Islam is actually more evolved. It's smarter, and because it's smarter, it's more political. It's actually learned the lessons of both Judaism and Christianity. So what did Judaism have? It had a lot of the same sort of corporal punishments and the cruelty that Islam has in terms of the punishment and the statesmanship and the war and the militancy. That was all in Judaism, but it wasn't that much of an afterlife issue that you're going to burn in hell or heaven or anything like that. Christianity came in; it was very love and peace and hippie and all that stuff, according to legend. But they also said that if you don't accept me as your savior, right, you're going to burn in hell forever, eternal torture. Okay, so that was the terrorism of Christianity. Okay. Now what Islam did is it took both of those. It took like the corporal and the earthly punishments and the laws and the statesmanship and the politics of Judaism from the Old Testament, and it took the afterlife and the eternal torture from Christianity, and it actually combined it into a system that was very, very effective. It was very effective as a political system. So in that way, just by virtue of being chronologically, the later one, I think it ended up becoming more dangerous because it was it was learned from the lessons and the mistakes of the past religions. So
all right, let's intellectual dark web. List of the dark web people.
No, but
our guests respond to what we're saying, and then we move to the rest of the dark web.
Coming back to what Sam Harris says, I do think that I agree with you when it comes to I know that Sam Harris likes Douglas Murray a lot. I feel like Douglas Murray uses a lot of identity politics. He's really about nation states and Christian Europe and all of that stuff. And I'm uncomfortable with the way he talks about Muslim immigration, even if I think that so Douglas Murray is another example of a person. So I disagree with Sam Harris.
But another thing about Omar says, sitting with people that like Ben Shapiro, like Ali mentioned at the beginning of, I don't know, but we were on air or off air. We sat with people and had a friendly conversation with people that said that under Sharia state, me and Ali should be executed. And we sat down with this person, I had him on a show, and we had a friendly conversation with him. And this person was an Islamic Muslim fundamentalist. That doesn't mean, we endorse his position, right?
And we challenge
that. I think that position doesn't mean somebody is tribal. And if we're talking about tribalism, again, Sam Harris is somebody that has gone after the Trump administration. If he wanted to be so tribal, why wouldn't he stay away from the people that are anti-Islam? Then also a lot of them are also pro-Trump. So why wouldn't he just stay away from attacking Trump?
He's smarter than most of them.
You said then why wouldn't he also sit with Linda Sarsour? So just elaborate on that.
Yeah. So to me, it's a contrast between the people that you're comfortable with, right? So for somebody like Dave Rubin, he doesn't. By the way, he's always uses that example. I think Joe Rogan, who I also like, part of the intellectual dark web, talks about how Dave Rubin is, he doesn't like the bigots that he has on. He's only having open conversation with them. And I think that that's absolutely not true in the case of Dave Rubin.
Oh, we all agree on Dave Rubin.
Yeah. When he sat down with Brigitte Gabriel, he was fawning all over her. And she is the most extreme, dishonest anti-Muslim bigot that there could be. She started as an anti-Arab racist. And I think she capitalized on the moment that we have politically in this country. When we have Trump talking about banning Muslims when he was running for, a complete and total shutdown of Muslims entering the country. When somebody in the audience asked Trump about when are we going to get rid of Muslims, Trump entertained that idea and goes, yeah, we'll see what we can do about that. That's the political climate that we have, and that's why somebody like Brigitte Gabriel switched from anti-Arab racism to anti-Muslim bigotry.
We all agree on that. That's Brigitte Gabriel, Robert Spencer, these things we agree on. But I'm saying that I think that your counter to what Armin was saying about that, okay, we had a conversation with Daniel Hakikaju, who's told us we could be executed. Sam has conversations with the right, sort of like...
It's just that Sam's attitude towards Ben Shapiro is charitable, and it's not the same when it comes to Muslim public intellectuals.
He argues against his positions. What else should he do? Should he swear at him?
Armin, I think that's a legitimate point. I think what Omar is saying
you have to be friendly to people that you disagree with. Like Sam Harris disagrees with Ben Shapiro on a lot of his position, and he argues against him. What else should somebody do?
That's not the point. That's not the point. The point is that we agree with that he does, and you can engage with people. What Omar is saying is that why would he say that, okay, I'll talk to Ben Shapiro here, but I won't talk to Linda Sarsour? So
did he say that? Did he say he won't talk to Linda Sarsour?
It's obvious if he were to talk about Ben Shapiro the way he talks about Linda Sarsour, Ben Shapiro would never sit down with him. The point is there's a certain enhanced level of hostility when it comes to certain Muslim figures that Sam disagrees with.
Do you know if Sam Harris would not sit with Linda Sarsour? Is that what we're saying? Because I think he would.
He's never actually said. Right?
I'm sure if pushed to debate her, they might do it. But the point is that he goes on different shows and talks about how Linda Sarsour is a theocrat and a danger and this and that.
Yeah, but I think he would sit down with. I think if Linda Sarsour came on Sam Harris's show, he would treat him respectfully. And
Do you think it would be as friendly conversation as it was with Ben Shapiro, or was it just like two buds hanging out?
Well, knowing him, I gotta say yes.
I mean, I think so, because I saw him with Mariam Namazi, for example, and Mariam Namazi had went after Sam Harris, and he had called him bigot, racist, and all those stuff. And when Sam Harris has Mariam Namazi on his show, he was very nice. He was very respectful, and in fact, a lot of Sam's followers went after Mariam Namazi in such a brutal way, and Sam Harris was constantly calling out his followers to, please don't do this. You're not a fan of me if you do this to Mariam Namazi. He was defending somebody that called him a bigot. So I think he would do so. Right.
So I think that his main position is that he was reluctant to engage with people like Ezra Klein, because he thought that he was dodging, and he was and this is weird for me because I like Sam a lot and I like Ezra Klein a lot too.
Before anybody thinks me and Ali are such Sam Harris fanboys that we don't see him making any mistake, I am a lot against Sam Harris's position on Islamic reform, and I have when he was on our show on Secular Jihadists, I openly when he came on our show, we didn't Sam Harris agree with everything he said, just celebrate him. No. I attacked his position on Islamic reform. Ali has major disagreements with him. I just don't agree with the big accusations of bigotry. I might be wrong. I just don't agree with it. But go on.
So I want to say, I know that we want to move on to other people in the international dark web, but I'll just say one thing on the broader point you were making earlier, Ali, about the difference between Islam and other religions. And to me, I think that it's never really about the substance of the religion all that much. It's, it ends up being a lot of social and political developments that decide these things, which is why we see these things change over time. That there was a time when Christianity was dominating as a force for evil in the world during the Dark Ages, suppressing Zionist intellectualism and so on, and that this has now shifted, and that we have certain areas in the Muslim world where where we see a lot more religious fanaticism that has a negative impact. And I think that a lot of that has to do with political developments that are taking place. And it's self-evident in the sheer diversity that exists within the Muslim world, right? There is no one Muslim culture or Muslim way of thinking or whatever.
But when there's only one Quran.
Countries, that's right. But when you look exactly, I think you're making my point is that somebody who identifies as a Jew today can be a perfectly moral human being, and people reconcile religion and progressive values all the time in all religions. And you have somebody like Pete Buttigieg right now who's running for president and could very well be the next president, who is simultaneously Christian and feels very strongly about his faith as a Christian, and he's gay. As a matter of technicality, you can say that that's a contradiction, but who cares if it's a contradiction? If people are making these things work for themselves, if somebody who holds religious belief can find in himself, him or herself, to have progressive moral values, and then somebody who doesn't believe in God, like Christopher Hitchens, ends up supporting the Iraq invasion that cost 100,000 people, to me, religion is not the deciding factor here. People extreme morality.
Armin, wait.
No,
he asked me.
Who did he ask? Who did he ask?
Armin. He said, he was talking about me. Armin, this is a good sign, Omar, because it means that you're really getting Armin animated. This is going to be a good episode.
Go on.
But then we're going to get a lot of.
But Ali, you talk so slow.
Hold on. Hold on.
All right.
So, the thing that what you're saying, you said that the substance of religions doesn't really matter. This is something that I thought for the longest time. Mm-hmm. I think that you're right. There are political developments. There is socioeconomic development. There's cultural development, historically. Right, there are many things that happen that do influence the way these things happen. And yes, Muslims are very, very. It's certainly the exact opposite of a monolith. Okay, the Muslim community. So all of that is acknowledged. But the problem is that when you do have a faith, when you do have the substance of it, that cements a lot of really archaic ideas in time. And move away from Islam for a little bit. Look at the Catholic Church. Okay, everything from whether it was civil rights, whether it was women's rights, whether it was gay rights, science, Galileo, everything that they did, they held everything back. They slowed the process down for the longest time because of the substance of the religion, because of what it said. Even as they became more progressive as people, as human beings, right? The substance of the religion held them back. With Islam, another distinction, which I think that actually makes it a little more, and by more dangerous, I just mean that it's just a natural consequence. It would have to be more dangerous because there were two religions before it. It would have to learn what mistakes they made. It has to poach the the people who belong to those religions and convert them to itself. So it has to be by definition more manipulative. And we're speaking as secularists here, right? So when it does that, there's also an element of the fundamentalism, right? Fundamentalism in Christianity is defined as people who believe that the Bible is literally the Word of God. Only about 30% of people actually believe that. Many people believe it's divinely inspired. Reformed Judaism has totally gotten rid of the concept that the Old Testament was the Word of God. But with the Quran, right, with Islam, the substance of the religion is still thought to be infallible, and it's still thought to be the literal Word of God by the majority of Muslims still today. It's actually changed. It is changing now, but that's how it's been. So I'm not saying that it is the most religion. It's going to be the most dangerous religion for all time. I'm acknowledging that Christianity had its time in the Dark Ages, where the Christian states in Europe at the time, the Dark Ages, made ISIS look like kindergartnens. And I've said that before. That has happened.
You guys are mixing Islam and Muslims and Christianity.
That's what I'm trying to say. We're talking about there's different ways. When you talk about what Christians did in the name of Christianity, and when you look at the substance of Islam, there is a big conflation between stuff that came directly from the substance and stuff that they interpreted for their own political motives. And there's a big mishmash of things. And it's really, really hard to parse. But the substance, when you make it infallible, you make it divine, you make it virtuous, it lends endorsement to the actions.
See,
right?
Okay.
Armin, you go first. You've been waiting for a long time to talk. I'll go after you.
Listen to the guest, Omar.
Yeah.
Go
ahead. All right.
Okay.
I'll squeeze a couple of quick things in. First, I want to challenge that idea that the extent to which the substance of the religion is what matters. Take Judaism for an example. There are extremists in the West Bank right now who carry out acts of vandalism to drive Palestinians out of their homes, and the belief fundamentally is religious, right? It's the belief that God gave this land to the Jews, and therefore, as happened with the Canaanites before, you're entitled to drive people off of their land because God gave it to you and now it's yours.
Very dangerous view.
Extremely dangerous view. However, the person who also wakes up who's Jewish, even though by the text you're supposed to kill people who work on the Sabbath, it would never occur to them to lift a finger to kill somebody who's working on the Sabbath. It's not because they're less religious, though.
Ali, you can't
My point is that they could be equally devout, and that thought would never occur to them because it's ultimately not really about the details in the book.
It is. Okay.
I don't think it's.
No, Ali, it's not your turn. Ali, it's not your turn. I waited for you. After the guest is my turn.
Okay.
But that's the thing. There is a contrast between what people happen to choose to be fundamentalist about and what they don't. Is that if it's an act of violence against Palestinians that ends up being politically advantageous to you, then suddenly there is justification in the book and you're all gung-ho about it. But if it's something that's going to create strife within the Jewish community itself, you want to stay away from it, so suddenly you're a lot less literal about what the book says. And that, to me, is the fundamental difference here, is that a lot of...
No, Ali, you can't. Ali, it's my turn. You can't respond.
No, I'm responding.
You're not. No, you told me to wait, and I waited because I know you were going to give me a turn.
I want to squeeze one tiny point also about...
Tiny point.
And to me, it's the same about the sort of distinction. Armin, this one is for you, because I know that you raised that point. Sort of the confusing religion and people. I agree that Islam and Muslims are two different things. I heard you guys talk about before about why you think the term Islamophobia is problematic because it conflates criticism of Islam with bigotry towards Muslims. As a matter of technicality, I can see how that presents confusion, but I think also the term anti-Semitism is technically inaccurate, but as long as we understand it to mean anti-Jewish bigotry, that's all that matters, and that's why I'm comfortable with the term Islamophobia, because even though technically it's complex, we know that it means anti-Muslim bigotry. And for me, is that there is a certain level at which criticism of Islam crosses into anti-Muslim bigotry, which is when you demonize Islam to a point to where it's just the most horrifying thing ever, and you say that the people who believe in it, you have to watch out for their immigration into the country, you have to do this and you have to do that. That becomes indistinguishable from...
Well, no, it depends on your intention. Depends on your intention, and it depends on your intentions, right? I definitely agree that some people criticize Islam the same way we do, but they have different intentions. They have bigoted intentions.
But it's people that you guys like too, right? Like Ayaan Hirsi Ali says, every devout Muslim supports 9/11, and that to me is an extremely irresponsible thing to say.
All right.
That really puts people, the logical conclusion of that type of thinking is that when you go to a mosque, who do you expect to see? Devout Muslims. And therefore, these are people who support terrorism and are legitimate targets.
Okay, I don't support any person 100%, and I'm not against... I can't think of any person right now that I'm 100% against, right? Every person it's not. I'm not like, oh yes, everything Sam Harris says I'm for, or everything Ben Shapiro says I'm against. No, it should be one position at a time. I don't endorse anybody 100%. Okay, but and I think Ali is the same. But here's the thing: when I grew up in a Islamic community, right? Half of my life now. I think it's still most of my life, but I grew up around people that were all called Muslims. And almost all of them, I think all of them, had a copy of the Quran in their house, right? Mm-hmm. And they did not know anything about what this book contains. Again, I tell people, these are people that kiss this book, before going on a trip. They take it out on New Year's as decoration. If you go to high school, you just know the parts that the government has picked for you, and you just memorize those parts, and you pass the exam, and then you forget about it right after you pass your exam. But I did not know a single person in my own social life for 20 years of living there that had read that book cover to cover. I knew about them like on TV or maybe some other people, but I've never met any person face to face in my 20 years living in Iran, meeting thousands of Muslims that read the book cover to cover. If I made up a verse and told them this is in the Quran, they would believe me. If I come up with a horrific verse that is in the Quran and I told them this is in the Quran, they would be shocked. They would just say they will tell me, like, they will actually have to go check to believe me, right? And all of these people are called Muslims, right? So what I'm suggesting is that, and that's one side. So all of these people are called Muslims, even though they don't follow Islam, they don't read about Islam, they don't know what Islam stands for and what's against. And all of these people are called Muslims, right? I'm talking. If you want to call Islam, if Islam is too much of if you think Islam and Muslim is too connected, I'll just call out the Quran. How about that? Quran is a very dangerous book. Anybody that follows the Quran and Hadith word to the letter is going to be a very, very dangerous person. That's all I'm claiming. And if you want to call it Islam, you call it Islam. If you want to call it something else, call it something else. That's all I'm saying. On the other hand,
as opposed to the Bible, I mean, that's my point.
No. So, if you follow the Bible word by word, you wouldn't make a week before going to jail, right? I was not suggesting,
especially the Old Testament.
The only difference is that if you follow the Bible word to word, you will become you're a very, very dangerous person. And if you follow the Quran, you're also a very dangerous person. The Quran also has guidance for a very dangerous government, not just a very dangerous individual. That's the only difference to me, right? The Bible doesn't have much of a guideline for a very dangerous government. The Quran has a
New Testament.
The guide, I mean, the Old Testament, okay. So the Quran is more easily a guidebook for a very dangerous government. That's all I'm saying.
Okay,
No, Ali, I waited for you. When it comes to when you look at good Muslims, right, that are doing good things, there's very little that you could take from what they're doing and direct that to the Quran or the Hadith. And the claim that we're making when it comes to religion is not a very extraordinary claim. Every Muslim, the more they're influenced by Islam, and every Christian, the more they're influenced by Christianity, the more of a dangerous person they are. The less they are, the like all these great Christians, and I don't just make that claim about Islamic golden age or the Arab golden age, the Enlightenment age. In what Christian countries, you cannot direct that to Christianity is not responsible for that. These are Christians that were scientific, they did great work, they did a lot of philosophical work.
It's a rebellion against Christianity.
But every person,
I disagree with that so
but,
much. I don't think the degree of religiousness is tied to propensity.
No. I didn't say degree of. I didn't say degree of.
Armin. Omar, last word, and then we're going to move on because we only have 20 minutes left.
But I think I'm going to be misrepresented here. What I was saying. I wasn't saying degree.
Trust me, I am almost a spectator in this now.
Yeah.
And I'm telling you
that
both of you have made your point.
Fine.
Made your point. So we're kind of going.
But my last 10 seconds. This is not true. This is not just true about religion. It's true about any false idea. any false idea, any idea that is not compatible with reality, the more your behavior and your life is impacted by false ideas, whether they're religious or not, the more you're going to have unfavorable results.
Okay.
And
Okay.
my only,
Omar-
I'll also put it in one sentence so we can move on.
No, you take your
No, no,
time.
go.
Don't
All right.
Go.
more
No,
than a sentence.
So I
Gotta
think,
get this out.
I think that the fact that you have people who end up committing acts of terrorism who identify with ISIS, who are not particularly religious, who drink, who whatever, and the fact that you have very devout people who spend all day in the mosque and who are very peaceful, denotes the fact that this is ultimately not about the substance of what is in the book and not about the extent to which somebody is actually religious and tied to the faith.
Your religious
there are so
habits
many-
doesn't mean.
Armin,
Yeah.
Armin, we know
Okay.
what the counter argument is.
Yeah. Okay.
It's
Just there are so
You're-
many other factors in play for why people do horrible things.
I know.
And I think that the same person who might commit one act of violence and scream Allahu Akbar, if he were in a slightly different social context, he might be screaming, death to all black people or whatever.
I
To
agree.
me, there's a huge degree of similarity between somebody like Dylan Roof, who
Yeah.
shot up the black church, and somebody who's a Muslim fundamentalist who, carries out an ISIS bombing of some sort, even though one of them is not religious at all, right?
Yeah,
Like, we're
because
talking
all
about
false
people who-
ideas are religious.
Armin.
I
let him
agree
finish.
with you because
Armin,
I didn't say
Armin,
no.
Armin.
I didn't say
I'm
religion.
I'm getting a text message telling me.
Okay.
Tell you,
All right, sorry.
I love you. You know that.
Yeah, sorry.
But come on.
Go on.
Come on. I actually gotta. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah,
Omar.
just ideas are one thing. The substance of a belief, when you're talking about Islam or Christianity or Judaism or what's in the substance of the books, that's very, very different from what somebody is as a practicing Muslim. Those are very, very different things. I'm just saying that in general, when you're talking about the American Muslim community and the way that it's portrayed as a threat, based on the substance of what's in the Quran, that does not carry any weight as far as I'm concerned. In the same way that portraying Christians as a threat because of the substance of what's involved in the Bible, or Jews as a threat, I find to be just completely missing the point. Is
Okay.
that we as a society have found a way to reconcile these things. People choose to continue identifying with these religions while also holding progressive moral views and values. And that's good enough for me. I think that we can be honest about the fact that threats to human existence of all kinds come from all kinds of sources, including people who fancy themselves secular, rational people who can also be huge advocates of cruelty and who believe in horrible things as well. So why focus on religion?
The idea that bad ideas don't influence bad behavior is an extraordinary claim, and I don't think it's supported. And I never said that religion is the only source of bad ideas.
And we made and that point.
And it just should not be overemphasized. I certainly will agree that religion influences to some extent.
Yeah,
but I think it's exaggerated when we talk
and this is why Atheist
guys,
Republic goes
hold
after
on.
China. This is
Down.
why Atheist Republic goes after Chinese
our-
treatments of Muslims more than Muslims do on a per capita basis.
Okay. Now the thing is, when we said last word.
Right.
Let's go. I know that it seems like you're making a point, Armin, but what you're saying in response, you've already said.
Okay.
And everybody who's listening knows Omar's position on this. Knows your
but
position.
this is fun.
And
This is
we
good.
and we disagree. I'm
Yeah.
only doing this in the interest of time. I don't like being the
Go,
asshole here.
okay, Ali, I
but
agree. Ali, I agree. Let's move on. Sorry.
Yes.
By the way, guys, I'm trying.
zooming-
I'm really trying. Okay.
Zooming out
All right.
this conversation that you had, Omar and Armin, the question to me is that when you hear these criticisms, the thing that Armin is talking about, the reasons why he thinks Islam is more dangerous than other religions, similar to Sam Harris and everything, do you think that this is something, even if it can potentially people can interpret things the way they are, but do you think it comes from a position of bad faith, or do you think it comes from a position of some sort of anti-Muslim hostility?
Good question.
Like the position that Armin is articulating.
I think, as the point that Armin made, there are people with very different motivations who weigh in on issues. So I do not think that inherently anybody who tries to make a case that Islam is more dangerous is coming at it from a bigoted position. But I do think that it's important to look at things in context. At the end of the day, this is not a philosophy lecture in a college where we're debating things in the abstract. We have a real life situation where anti-Muslim hate crimes are on the rise. You've had the Christchurch mosque shooting. You've had the Quebec mosque shooting in Canada. You have the people in Portland who tried to defend a couple of hijabi women on a train, and the guy ended up stabbing two of them and badly stabbed two of them to death and badly injured the third person.
Finsbury Mosque, yeah, all that.
Yep. And beyond just the acts of violence themselves, we have a completely fucking ridiculous political climate in the United States right now where it is perfectly permissible to basically engage in anti-Muslim bigotry, particularly in the Republican Party. The kind of things that Donald Trump has gotten away with, the kind of stuff that the Republican Party in general on so many candidates have gotten away with, this sort of anti-immigrant and anti-Muslim rhetoric, it's really out of control. And in this context, I think it is important to weigh the way that you engage in these things. And if you are inadvertently playing into the hands who are pushing an anti-Muslim agenda by nodding to them that yes, Islam is more dangerous, you're enabling really ugly forces in our current time. And I think it is important to pay attention to that. And by the way,
how do you balance it? So we have, because the one thing, and this is something that I think if Armin was speaking right now, then he would say too. And I'm surprised that Armin's Armin, I don't want you to like die down completely.
No.
But so one thing that we do here is, because a lot of our audience, Omar, is actually not in the US or in Western countries. A lot of our audience is in Saudi Arabia, it's in Bangladesh and everything. We're very, very in tune with their issues. Okay, so Islamic theocracy, right? For what Trump is over here, Islamic theocracy is over there without the checks and balances, right? That they have. So when we're talking about these things on this podcast, for instance, and we're talking about it from a global scale, how do we balance their frustrations, right, at being censored, and their rebellion against Islamic theocracy, like the White Wednesdays campaign in Iran, where when women are taking off their hijab, they're saying we don't want the Islamic Republic, all of these things that are happening, right? And they're not just political, a lot of it is actually, so there's this kind of thing happening. And then, talk about that and be mindful of how that message is landing here in the West, where, as you say, correctly so, that there is a hostile anti-Muslim climate. And I know I personally I've changed the way that I talk about things too, because I am concerned about messaging. I don't think this stuff happens in a vacuum. I want to be as honest about the points I want to make in my criticism of religion, Islam, whatever, but I want to be mindful of the kind of climate I'm in. In the Obama years, it was different. When the regressive left thing was a bigger issue, it was different. Now that's been overcorrected and way more by like these sort of the far right people, it's different. How do we
let the guest answer? Okay.
So, a couple of things. I mean, look, at the end of the day, I think that it's really about how we engage on these issues. It's absolutely true that different audiences need to hear different things. I have not made many videos in Arabic, but when I do, they are targeted at faults that exist in that region of the world, and problems that the Middle East faces. So it is about sectarianism and sort of anti-Semitism and things like that. That's the messaging, because that's what that audience needs to hear. And then when I do videos in English that are primarily directed at an American audience, it is more talking about sort of the climate of anti-Muslim bigotry in the US and Israel-Palestine and things of that sort. I think that as long as we are specific about what we're going after, I think it's fine. Yes, of course, an anti-Muslim bigot is going to try to capitalize on you being critical of some oppressive Muslim government's practices that are, anti-liberal and anti-democratic and just flat out oppressive, I think is the correct way to put it. That's not what I'm concerned about. And I think that ultimately, when you look at the fact that there are so many progressive Muslims in the Muslim world fighting for a more liberal existence, I think we'll look for ways to empower them. And to me, that's why it goes back to the fact that I don't think it's necessary to harp on Islam as a religion in general, as much as it is to harp on the regressive, stupid practices, even if you think that there is some basis for them in the theology. Given the fact that there are so many people who identify as progressive and object to them, those are the forces to empower. They have credibility within a Muslim society. You're not going to eliminate an entire religion within the foreseeable future, not in the next century or two. And so for people who are working for reform within the context of identifying as Muslim, in the same way that people identify as Jewish and Christian and still hold liberal values, I think that's where the attention ought to be focused.
Right.
Armin, you're dying.
No.
What do you have to say?
No, I'm not going to respond to that because we need to move on. Just one last thing: getting rid of Islam completely even though that would be nice, is not our goal, right? But because it's not reasonable, not in our lifetime at least. But we have to move on because we have the title of this topic is the intellectual dark web, and so far we only mentioned Sam Harris and Dave Rubin. So I think before we run out of time, we at least have to mention two more people like Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson. So I'm going to read a tweet by. And I think we're going to move on to a place where we agree with on a little bit more. Ben Shapiro had this tweet in 2010. I don't know if it's fair. Let me know, guys, if you think it's fair to bring out a tweet that is 9 years old. But Ben Shapiro is saying, Israelis like to build, Arabs like to bomb crap and live in open sewage. This is not a difficult issue. So, I mean, it's difficult for people. So I don't think this is out of context because there is no context. This is just a standalone tweet. So if people say that this is an out of context issue.
He's been called out on it, by the way, and he's retracted that. He's issued a correction saying, I didn't mean to talk about Arabs. I was talking about Palestinians specifically, as though that made it any better. And then he retracted that.
It did make it better, but not that much better.
Yeah.
I mean,
it didn't. It
really did not.
No. I mean, if you're a bigot against not all Arabs but some Arabs, you're still a bigot. You're still a bigot, but you're less of a bigot.
I'm really sorry. I know you have a Palestinian background, but most Arabs, when I was growing up, for some reason they hate the Palestinians. I don't know why, but the Palestinians and the Egyptians, all of the Saudi Arabs at least, used to harp. It was bizarre, but there's that stuff that happens with it anyway. But go ahead. Yeah.
But in general, I mean, look, he's had Ben Shapiro's had multiple retractions on that and sort of like tried to clarify. But ultimately, all of his retractions related to anti-Arab bigotry and anti-Palestinian bigotry are moot because he never fundamentally changed the political arguments he was making. Right? He made the argument that there is no solution in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict apart from ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, because we should never give Palestinians a state, and Israel should control all the territory. And if we control all the territory and we don't give them a vote and they stay there, they're constantly going to cause problems. So let's just ethnically cleanse them. And then he came out and apologized for calling for ethnic cleansing, but his political analysis never changed. He never said, never mind, I was wrong, we should accept them as equals and live together. Or said, never mind, I'm wrong, they should have a state of their own. He only apologized for the ethnic cleansing bit because he knows that that's politically toxic, so he wanted to retract it. But it's obvious that his political analysis and his attitude is very, very anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian. So I don't take his retractions to be of any merit at all.
So his correction was, which is, I think, proves your point. One of his corrections was there are many, many Christians and Muslim Arabs who are wonderful people, just not the ones who oppose Israel in Israel-Arab conflict. Which is, again, it's very not a very. I mean, first of all, if that's what you mean, then why did you say, Arabs? Like that was
because a lot of people responded to you. They were mad at it, and like, okay, I gotta say something.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree that was a very bigoted statement. Again, just to make it clear, like we are against religion, not against the Arabs. In fact, again, I don't like to call it the Islamic Golden Age because it had nothing to do with Islam. I like to call it the Arab and Persian Golden Age, right? And a lot of Arabs, the Arabs used to be the center of science, philosophy, art, mathematics, translation. In fact, the only reason why we have a renaissance in Europe that eventually led to the Age of Enlightenment was because of the translations that the Arabs made of Greek philosophers and reintroduced Europe to its past. Like it was through the translations that Arab made of Greek philosophers and brought it back to Europe that the renaissance of philosophical ideas and away from religion was possible, right? So even the birth of the Enlightenment movement eventually which is, again, you have to don't mix these two. The Renaissance first happened, Enlightenment is a byproduct of Renaissance. All of this happened because of lost knowledge that the Arabs brought back to the world. So
I think we're making two sides of the same.
We're also kind of going into a tangent.
No, but let our guest continue.
No, just in the sense that yes, I don't think that Muslims translated the works of Greek philosophy into different languages because the Quran said to do it.
No.
But that the fact that they believed in the Quran did not stop them, and that's the only point, is that people can reconcile being progressive and thoughtful and intelligent and scientific and also ascribing to
what
to
you
Islam
call
or any
what you
other
call reconciling.
We've had this conversation.
No. Let me just say, what you call
yeah.
reconciling, I call ignoring.
Okay.
So what you call
Alright,
reconciling with Islam, I call it Muslims who are ignoring Islam. But go on, Ali.
Let's move on. So I agree that this Ben Shapiro thing. I think
Has
we all
Jordan
kind of agree.
Peterson ever said like I haven't seen? Maybe I'm not saying he hasn't, but I haven't seen Jordan Peterson say anything that could be considered anti. I'm not saying he didn't say it. People are like, oh, Armin's. You know, can you educate me to anything Jordan Peterson?
Actually, Jordan, and I'll give you the evidence that he hasn't. The only time I heard him talk about it is that I think that he was at some event and some audience member asked him what he thought of Muhammad. And he said, well, you know, Muhammad, he's like, he was very sort of ambiguous.
Stuff like that.
He's like, I don't know what to make about it. Like, he was more of a statesman and a warrior, whereas Jesus was,
no,
he's a Christian.
Okay, actually, you're misrepresenting.
But he's very popular. Jordan Peterson is very popular in Saudi Arabia. A lot of people, because he talks about, he's a white, progressive, I suppose for them, a Christian guy in Canada talking about how there needs to be some boundaries between genders in the workplace.
Mm-hmm. So let me correct what he said, Ali. What he said was like, so Jordan Peterson keeps telling that you need stories, you need this, you know, way to, I don't know, I forgot his terminology. I haven't listened to him for a very long time, but which is a healthy thing to do. But he was suggesting that stories could be used to build like moral framework and all that nonsense. And then somebody asked him, well, if you could do that with Christianity, why can't you do that with Islam? And Jordan Peterson said, oh, that's a very good question. And he thought about it, and he said, well, because Muhammad was a warmonger, and I don't know how you could do that with a character like that. Again, I mean, I don't think I'm against that position because I think you can't do that with either Islam or Christianity. But I don't think that was an anti-Muslim position because it was specifically about Muhammad. But go on, I'll guess.
So I would agree that Jordan Peterson is not one of the people who sort of has this undue focus on Islam that some of the other people in the IDW do.
Right.
But however, he has made, and I think just by virtue of being surrounded by that crowd, including being close with Dave Rubin and so on, some of that stuff has seeped into his thinking. And I think the most egregious example that I can think of is when he was pushed on, you know, somebody said, why do you think feminists don't criticize Muslims or something to that effect? And Jordan Peterson responded by saying, I think it's their subconscious desire for brutal male domination. And I can't decide whether this is more offensive to Muslims or feminists, but it really is just,
I think that's more of a misogynist position than because it's true that, I agree that both Islam and Christianity, and no, not just both, and Judaism and Hinduism, and even Buddhism, has a religion that men dominate over women in all of his religions. So that position on Islam is true. The only hypocrisy is that he doesn't see that in Christianity, which is very clearly pointed out in the New Testament that women should be silent, they shouldn't have any position of authority, they should just listen to their man and be obedient, right? So that positioning on Islam is true, but again, the fact that this is a best position for women, I think that doesn't make it more of an anti-woman position than an anti-Islam position.
Yeah. So I think Jordan Peterson, in all honesty, I feel like there was a 15 minutes. I haven't heard anything about him in the last 6 months in any of the media or anything like that. So I don't know where he's at. I wanted to ask you one because I know. By the way,
just to be clear, some women do like dominance, right? But they are very clear.
There's all kinds of people.
Yeah, there's all kinds of people, and a lot of women are very clear that if it's something sexual, women that do like that, they are very clear that they know they want that in the bedroom, but they don't want that as a policy in government in their life. Like, no, this is something. To mix these two things together is really weird.
Like the people who say, "Well, women they love 50 Shades of Grey, so why don't they want men to rule over them?" So Omar, before we go, I wanted to ask you about something. And I know it's late, and I know you gotta, go tomorrow, and this has gone.
It's been a lively conversation.
It's been a lively conversation, and we gotta have you back to talk about.
Did I let you talk enough, or because our patrons are gonna?
You gotta be honest.
Omar, be honest.
I'm happy. I think I got most of my points across. So I'm
okay.
Good.
See, patrons, please, patrons, don't see. Our guest said he got all his points across. So don't.
Okay. I gotta. So before we let you go, because this is a topic that I think we've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah.
Is Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib the two Rashida Tlaib she's from a Palestinian background like yourself, Ilhan Omar. That she's received a lot of fire for some of the things that she said that they've said are anti-Semitic tropes, which I actually don't agree with everything she said. I don't particularly like everything she said. I wrote an article in the New York Post about how she comparing her and Sadiq Khan, and how their political approaches, and how she could potentially learn from him in terms of messaging. But we do feel like she has been a target of anti-Muslim bigotry because of her hijab and also some of the things.
Yeah, I agree.
And without her being at fault, and it's completely unjustified.
I mean, she does say some nonsense.
Go back to your country, send them back. When Trump said it, and people defended that. What do you? How do you feel about these two congresswomen?
In general, I have favorable views of them. I like them. I think they're sort of a firebrand to some extent. There are a reaction to the rise of Trump and Trumpism in our society, and I think a legitimate one. And I think that they have been the victims of a vicious smear campaign. There is no other way really to put it. In the case, and in some cases, it's really just a complete fabrication of quotes. And it really blows my mind the fact that mainstream media outlets just run with it. So I was at an event where Ilhan Omar was talking about the kind of pressure she was under to take a pro-Israel line. It was at a time when Congressman Juan Vargas had said, you're not allowed to question the U.S.-Israel relationship. And her reaction to that climate was to say, why am I under pressure to have allegiance to a foreign country? And literally that quote became, Ilhan Omar questions the allegiance of American Jews. And that was the mainstream narrative. And it was published in so many outlets that it really was,
right.
It's an incredible case, sort of a paradigm of how effective a propaganda campaign can be, a smear campaign that is based on absolutely nothing. I think that was one of the more egregious examples. And it was the same with Rashida Tlaib, who, when Marco Rubio had proposed a bill in the Senate to restrict the right of Americans to engage in First Amendment protected activity to boycott, she said, I think he forgot what country he serves. And clearly the implication there is that he forgot that the U.S. has a First Amendment. This is what we're known for, and this is what he's completely forgetting. And somehow that became... Rashida Tlaib accuses Jews of having dual loyalty to foreign countries, even though Marco Rubio is not even Jewish.
But there was also
this is the example how the right does baseless accusations of racism the same way that the left does baseless accusations of. This is why I'm being consistent, right? I'm being consistent. I don't like people to assume somebody is racist when there are more charitable explanations of their position, even if I disagree with their position. And I will call that out when the left does it. When people, and I call that out. Again, these are the same reasons. You're on my side. Like, there are more. So when somebody says Sam Harris is being racist, I think there are more charitable ways to look at his position. The same way with Ilhan Omar. This is right-wing people doing the same baseless accusations of racism and bigotry, the same way that they call out the left for doing the same thing.
In this case, it's not random people on Twitter. It's the President of the United States using the entire power of his office. And
that's
he published a video of Ilhan Omar dancing and claimed it was on 9/11. He retweeted that tweet. It's ridiculous. It really is ridiculous. And frankly, I think that her life is in real danger. The fact that the Republicans are allowing Trump to get away with it is really shameful for where we've gone.
They're going to allow him to get away with anything. But here's the thing. So here's my this is the frustration for me, is that there are things that Ilhan Omar has said that I don't like. There are things that I actually
like the Armenian genocide thing. Like she refused to call that the Armenian genocide.
Even the some of the stuff that they said was anti-Semitic tropes on Twitter that she said. There were, I think, two things I said that she did where she apologized for it, and she said that I wasn't aware growing up that these were anti-Semitic tropes. I believe that is an honest apology, but I do think that they were worthy. They were legitimate and deserved criticism for those things, as would be for any congressperson. The problem is, even when she does something wrong, when you're out there, and if I'm out there and I'm saying that I think that this is wrong, and then the next day, as you said, Trump tweets something about, she's implying that she's a terrorist, she was celebrating 9/11.
Yep.
I can't, it's very difficult for anybody to criticize her legitimately, because when you are going out and throwing a nuke on someone who's throwing a stone at you, right? Then you got to go, even if the person was throwing the stone, they were wrong. You have to protect them. Like you can't, because it sets a really bad precedent if you don't. And that's why I think that just overall the way that Trumpism works, my biggest frustration of it is, and people say, why do you talk about Trump? Why don't you talk about Islam like you wrote your book and all that stuff? And like, well, the problem is it makes my job a lot harder. I actually want to engage in an honest conversation about it. And when this guy comes around and he says, okay, all Muslims this, we're going to ban Muslims from the country. When that kind of thing happens, then it makes it a lot harder for me to have my conversation that I want to have in an honest way.
Omar.
I think that's 1,000%. I mean, on that we agree entirely, and it's the sort of the broader point that I was making, sort of about anti-Muslim bigotry and some of the ways that people, even like Bill Maher, frame things that I find deeply problematic, is that when you attack the entire Muslim community, you make the community very defensive and they're less open to internal criticism, and you make the job of reformers on the inside much, much harder.
Do you think?
Is that
let's not get into reform. Do you think that?
You know what I mean?
You think
whatever,
attacking
people who are fighting for more progressive values.
Right. Do you think that attacking Islam as a whole, while saying most Muslims do not follow Islam to the letter, and while pointing out constantly that in my opinion, most Muslims are better than Islam, do you think but generalizing Islam as an ideology as something dangerous? Do you think that's a fair point?
I think suggesting that Islam is more dangerous than Christianity and Judaism absolutely plays into an anti-Muslim narrative.
But what if I think it's true? Should I hold back because people could misuse what I'm saying?
Look, you make those judgments on your own of how you want to frame and phrase things. But I'm just saying
evolutionary theory, right?
Let him finish his answer.
No, evolutionary theory was misused by the Nazis for their own racist agenda. Does that mean that we should hold back on teaching evolution? No, right? Obviously not.
Obviously not.
Right.
But you have to be careful about how you talk about this stuff, because if you do sound like you're talking about eugenics, then it's a real problem. And
that's why every time you mention that Islam is I might be wrong, but I think Islam as a whole is a dangerous ideology that needs to die. But every time I point that out, this is my version of being careful. I point out, by the way, reminder, my position is that most Muslims are better than Islam, just like most Christians are better than Christianity. That's how I try to emphasize that.
It's about a point of emphasis, right? So your position is, which I don't agree with, but it is your position, that Islam is more dangerous than other religions. Why is that worth emphasizing? To what end? Why is that important? Who needs to hear that message? That to me is the point, is that if we're fighting for reform and open-minded, and however you want to put it, if we're fighting for more progressive values, who needs to hear that message that you believe that Islam is more dangerous than other religions?
So it depends on who you're talking to, right? So, for example, at an atheist republic, we focus on all religions, right? In fact, a lot of our resources is now going to, a lot of our attention that we're bringing on atheist republic is to defend Muslims in India and in China against the anti-Muslim prejudice of the government. So that's what a lot of our focus is on right now. So we are actually standing against an atheist regime that is going after Muslims, an atheist republic, right? But the times that I point out that Islam is more dangerous than Christianity is when people are telling me that it's not. That's the only time that, or the times that people are saying that this is something that should not be said. So my goal for saying that is to counter somebody that is saying that they're all equally dangerous, because I'm just fighting a falsehood. Another time that I think it's useful to say that is when people telling me something I shouldn't say something, and I always think that's the best time to say it, when other people are pushing back against you saying it.
But we've gone over this several times.
No, but I was responding to his answer. No, Ali, Omar asked the question. Omar asked me why would it make sense to say Islam is more dangerous than Christianity, and I gave him two scenarios why it makes sense.
That's fine. I'm just saying that both of your positions are absolutely clear on this. I think the audience knows, right? So
we don't have time for Patreon questions. We have some good ones in the live chat.
The last thing I wanted to do is just kind of clear up Sam Harris's position on the 9/11 mosque. He had written a whole post on this, and he also said that he had a paradoxical conclusion on this. He said that American Muslims should be absolutely free to build a mosque 2 blocks from ground zero, but the ones who should do it probably wouldn't want to. That's what he'd said.
And Alex is asking. I really have to get this. Would your guest sit down with Bridget Gabriel? Would you sit down with her?
So just quick background. I know that we're out of time. Yeah. Brigitte Gabriel has. I don't believe that she is capable of an honest conversation. So I would simply see no point. If people find a debate between me and Brigitte Gabriel entertaining, I might go for it. But I have direct experience with her where I was at an event that she was at, where she gave a talk, and she left without incident and then claimed that the Muslims had rushed the stage and that the police had to hustle her out. I was there and I
Would
knew
you sit with her though in a conversation? Would you sit with her?
Sorry, finish what you were saying.
Yeah, but I'm describing somebody who is incapable of having an honest conversation, who is transparently somebody who is full of hatred and is willing to lie in any way possible. I would sit down with her, not because I would find a conversation between me and her interesting or enlightening, or because I think that there's any value in us hearing each other's ideas. But I would be interested in sitting down with her to absolutely debunk the utter garbage that she spits out. So I would not mind
Mars is asking. Mars is asking question for Mars. Our patron is asking, how do you feel about Majid Nawaz's use of the terms to distinguish between radicals, conservatives, and moderates? Example: Islamist versus Muslim, for instance. Oh, I am against that. So, how do you understand the question?
So. Yeah. These are loaded though. I'm not a huge fan of Majid Nawaz. I'll just throw that out there. And I'm not familiar with the way he distinguishes between these categories. But in general, I do find that there is a meaningful distinction between an Islamist and a Muslim. To me, an Islamist is somebody who believes in political Islam and who believes that religion plays a big role in sort of regulating people's political life. And I don't agree with that. And
have you read the Quran? Have you read the Quran? No, have you read the Quran?
I've read huge parts of it.
So, but how could Islam be anything other than political, according to you?
There's literally the billions of Muslims who don't believe that.
No, I didn't say Muslims. I didn't say Muslim.
No, but he's saying
Islam.
Islamist and Muslim. Mars's question was about between Islam
so I agree with it.
And I agree with Omar. I actually think a Muslim is more
I agree. Okay, I agree with the difference between Muslims who are believe in political Islam and the Muslims that don't, because Muslims can be different, but Islam, as long as Islam cannot be different, unless you change the definition of Islam to something that has nothing to do with the Quran.
Yep. Again, this is about the technical definition of individual words and whether they make sense. The same with Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. I don't care what the technical words mean. We use them in such a way that a Muslim is anybody who identifies as a Muslim, and an Islamist is somebody who's committed to political Islam. That, to me, is a distinction that is fairly understood.
Okay, so the only difference I have with you, I agree with you, but instead of saying committed to political Islam, then Islamist would be somebody that is, to me, committed to Islam. Because Islam is political. So,
all right, guys.
Go on. All right, sorry.
Yeah, let's.
All right. By the way, where can people find you? If they want to follow
people can find me on YouTube and Twitter. My Twitter handle is Omar Baddar, and my YouTube is Omar Baddar 0. I had to use the 0 because we were out of names.
We're gonna put the links right in the description. And you know what, Omar, this is really good. I'd love to have you back on.
Yes.
Hopefully at some point to really talk about the Israel-Palestine issue as well. Hopefully when something comes up, it'll be before Ben Shapiro's next retraction.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of which, like the one thing that I know he can't retract is his foreskin. We know that.
We need to talk about. By the way, you are very. By the way, you have a lot more experience on the Israel-Palestine issue, right? So.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's going to be a major point of disagreement between us, which makes it interesting.
Wow.
So
all right.
I think it may not be, actually.
I did not see that coming.
No,
judging from this, like I'm realizing.
Actually, okay, no, wait. It might be a lot of agreements and disagreements. No. I think I'm going to be less biased than you, Omar. Though. Like I think I'm going to agree with you, but I'm going to be like less. Okay, we'll see. But I think that would be.
That's okay. Looking forward to it.
His main frustration here, not to speak on his behalf, but sometimes I feel like I kind of know him better than he knows himself. Sometimes is that
me?
That's a claim. Anyway, so is that I think that he agreed with you a lot more than he wanted to. Looking for a place to disagree.
Yeah.
No disagreements.
No shortage. I'm looking. Yeah. I mean, potentially it's my fault for also trying to find as much common ground as possible and disagreeing only when it's necessary. But
yeah, it's okay. And again, like if I'm interrupting you and you don't like it, just like fight back. You're like, no, Armin, just be quiet. Like
you know what? There's no, but honestly, even I try that. You guys have heard me a lot of this podcast. I'm like, Armin,
So Ali does it too. It's not just me, but yeah. But,
we need to build the technology to have a mute button. This way we can have a veto power over you.
I can't do that. I do, but you know, it makes the show. Like that's what makes it more fun. So in a way, but yes, next time you just jump in, and I'll try to do a better job as well, and Armin will too. But we'd love to have you back. Thanks a lot, man. That went super over time.
Yep.
And we took a lot of your time. I'm also in the Eastern time zone, so I also have to deal with getting up early.
Yeah.
Yep.
And oh shit, now I have to get a kid ready. You don't have to get a kid ready, right?
Nope, just me. So yeah, it's a lot easier.
Now I don't feel so.
Last reminder to whoever is listening or watching this that we rely on our community to share our episodes, because YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, they just hate us and they don't let us grow. So we rely on you guys to share these episodes with as many people as you can. And also, if you can support the show by becoming a patron, link is always
become a patron. Once we have we get up to 500 patrons, we're going to be able to translate the show into multiple languages:
Arabic and Persian and Urdu
Arabic,
and
everything.
Malay. We're going to translate our the most key episodes and slowly work our way to our other.
Unfortunately, most of this this podcast is listened to mostly. The final public audio episode, Omar, is going to come out on. It's going to be on iTunes, your favorite podcast app. That's going to be for the public. The video is only for the patrons. So you guys got exclusive access to this live stream as well, and you were able to ask live questions. Unfortunately, we didn't get to a lot of them in this episode. But
another thing I'm going to do is
leave us an iTunes review.
By the way, and last thing I want to mention to our patrons, I'm going to send out a message to all our patrons asking them for all of their Skype IDs at the same time, and I'm just going to create a Skype group for our patrons and just once every week just call all of the people on our patrons that you have a huge group chat with all of our patrons at the same time. Like, send me.
That's not going to be a disaster at all.
That's not going to be.
What could go wrong?
No. So, guys, I'm going to send you a message on Patreon. If you're interested in this chaotic group Patreon chat, send me back your Skype ID, and we'll have a messy discussion. All right.
Okay, so we're not gonna stop this brainstorming. Right. And we'll let our guest go to bed as he wants to.
Great chatting with you guys.
Love you guys.
Yeah.
Bye.
Anyway, let's stop recording. Stay down for a second.
The secular jihadists have been made possible thanks to the Illuminati and the covert support of Israel and the CIA. That's what we have been told, but we haven't received our checks yet. If you like what we do, please support us. Share the podcast with your friends. Write and tweet us with topic and guest suggestions. Or head over to secularjihadists.com and give $1 or more for exclusive access to live video. Have your questions read and answered on the air, and more. Till next time, may the flying spaghetti monster be with you.